4, 3.
And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider, Sports Talk 1050, WTKA, online at WTKA.com. Sam Webb, Ira Weintraub, and the crew is back. They were concerned. Man, we aren't going to have crap to talk about. So we'll figure it out, guys. You know, we could always just toss it to Craig, have him give us something.
Jibber jabber. I'm the king of pointless jibber jabber.
But little did we know, there was going to be some more coaching movement that took place, and not only would a coordinator leave, they would make quick work of finding a replacement. So a lot to get into on today's show. Let's welcome the crew in, starting with Brian Cook from MGoBlog. Brian, good morning. How are you?
Hello. There was also another newsworthy thing that recently happened.
yeah, and then the release of the Robert Anderson report, that too. Absolutely. Yeah. Seth Fisher from MGoBlog.
Yeah, I'm dying at the back of a submarine going, I would like to have seen an off-season.
And then, of course, Mr. Craig Ross, who I wonder if you've had a chance to talk to John about the new lottery down in Ohio. Get vaccinated, win $1 million.
I haven't, but I know that he's been talking about these sort of mobile vaccination vans and buses, which I think they've been doing down some in Toledo. But, he talks to DeWine's office routinely, so I don't know, what and I'm skeptical, to be honest, that it's going to have do much good, but I sure hope it does. I know there was some talk this morning about politics, and it's inappropriate somehow to talk about politics on a sports talk radio show. And, I'm looking at my boy, Rudolph Virchow, who one of these days we'll talk about, but one of his quotes is, "Medicine is a social science and politics is nothing else but medicine on a large scale." So you can't talk about medicine or public health without it being political. And in this particular case, you and Ira and WTKA are doing a major social good by encouraging people to be vaccinated, not just for themselves, but for everyone in our society, and to get things back to normal. And so to complain about that as, quote, political is borders on the obscene. But
well, look, I read that email to give that emailer a voice. Doesn't change what I do. Not going to make me not encourage people to get vaccinated just because one guy is his position on it is politically influenced, which is his prerogative. But I even framed it as a sports question a couple of weeks ago. It was like if it was attached to attendance at a sporting venue, would it move you from whatever anti-vaccination position you have? For some, it would. For others, like that emailer, obviously it wouldn't. Which is, hey man, to each his own. But let's talk about last week. So late in the week, word comes out, Mo Linguist is in the mix for the Buffalo job. And then the next day, he's hired for the Buffalo job. And immediately there was a contingent of the fan base who said, this is a sign of just how bad things are in Ann Arbor. A guy just left Michigan for Buffalo. I wonder if you guys saw that kind of response on MGoBlog. And I wonder what your response was to that news. And again, before we even get to Steve Clinkscale, just take me back to last Friday and what your mood was, what your thoughts were, what the mood and thoughts were on the board.
Well, I mean, there's a certain contingent of the Michigan fan base that is ready to complain at the drop of a hat, which is growing steadily on a yearly basis, understandably. Yeah. And I feel like those people were going to complain, and they did. And the staff turnover has been, I think, an issue. So to have some more of that feels bad. I don't know if there's really going to be much impact on anyone other than Seth, who wrote a piece that he now has to get rid of. Because, I mean, this guy was a defensive backs coach, right? He got a co-DC title. But, those guys are recruiters primarily, and Michigan went and got a guy who seems like a really good recruiter. I feel like maybe Michigan will miss a little bit of his brain trust if Clinkscale isn't, but Clinkscale has actually had really good secondaries at Kentucky too. So, I mean, I don't think this is necessarily a downgrade except from a continuity standpoint.
Well, I think what Sam was asking maybe was pre-Clink scale, what did you feel about it? I mean,
Well,
I know I felt a certain sense of despair. Like this program does nothing but roll snake eyes over and over and over and over. And I hardly blame Linguist. I mean, Linguist did the right thing for himself. I mean, Buffalo's a good program. It's a great, like University of Toledo, for example, it's a great stepping stone to other bigger coaching jobs. And you've got to tell a guy like that, yeah, take the opportunity. But on the other hand, he's been here, 3.5 months? People were excited about him. Next thing you know, gone. And so it's just like, what can this program do that's ever right? And so, I mean, I certainly felt some of that. I don't know if you did. When Clinkscales was hired, which I didn't think would happen, to be honest. I thought, okay, they've rectified it. We're right back to where we were. Maybe the recruiting base is a little more Midwesterny now than Texas, but I mean, there's actually a study done that showed, this is a number of years ago, that said that teams that recruit and bring in talent within 300 miles of their campus actually do a lot better. And that regional recruiting works out better for teams than nationwide recruiting. Now, I don't know if that's still true, but at the time there was a lot of data to indicate that it is.
Yeah, transfers are higher. I've looked at that data before. Transfers are higher for guys who are out of state, especially out of region, because you're 18, 19 years old. You get thrown into this professional operation, then you get homesick, and you kind of get lost. And it's a huge difference from where you were before, and your family aren't there and whatnot, and that's difficult. I think that the feeling was if they don't get Clinkscale, and there was maybe a 30% chance they would get him, that this was going to be a real problem because you could lose Will Johnson, who could go anywhere he wants to in the country if he wants, right? And if you lose that guy, your recruiting class falls apart, and that's really kind of the light at the end of the tunnel for the situation that the defense is in. They just need talent, and we lost a recruiter who was going to go get talent. Well, Clinkscale's a recruiter, and he seems to know what he's doing, and I think he's much more likely to stick around than Linguist. I don't fault Linguist at all for taking that job. Head coaching jobs come out around how often, and one that actually is a stepping stone and one that you've worked at before, and that's how many opportunities are like that. And I shouldn't be the guy saying this, but for a black coach, it's not that easy to find those opportunities, and that had to be something that was playing on his mind, and I totally respect that decision. It was just bad luck, but you look back and say, how come Michigan didn't get Clinkscale 2 years ago when they went and got Bob Shoop instead, right? Like, what's different now? And like those are the decisions you can ask about this program.
There are a few things I can name a few differences because I mean that's no secret. I've known Clink for a while. Well, first, the point that you made about here you have a black coach having an opportunity to become a head coach, and not for a lower tier, bottom of the barrel, mid-major program. I mean, Buffalo 3 straight bowl games. They got a 10-win season in there, and he had coached there before, so there's some familiarity there. And when you add to that the fact that the opportunities for black coaches are fleeting, yeah, you jump on that opportunity. It just is such a no-brainer for him to take that job. It's not a slight about the opportunity at Michigan. It's a convergence of for him anyway, of fortunate events. But what's different? Because I've said on this roundtable before, I said on the radio at the time, Bob Shoop wasn't going to bring anything. You were hoping that Bob Shoop's coaching acumen, his extensive experience, he had been a head coach, longtime defensive coordinator, that was going to compensate for what he clearly didn't bring to the table as a recruiter. And I just felt like at the time, and I said as they were going into the search that resulted in linguist, that you can't have such a deficit in one of those areas that it becomes a liability. That you maybe you don't have a guy who's as experienced as Bob Shoop, but you can still have a really good ball coach like Linguist was, like Klink is. But you got to have an ace recruiter. And I think I said at the time, you can't hire Bob Shoops when you got Steve Clinkscales out. And so they went and got that guy. And so what's different? In that run that resulted in Bob Shoop, there was not a co-title on the table. I mean, there weren't going to be any codes with Don, right? There weren't going to be any codes. And then, I mean, no, I'm not saying that in a disparaging sort of way. I'm just saying there weren't going to be any codes. And, he was at the time making more money or making the same amount of money at Kentucky that he would have made. I think it would have been more at Kentucky than he would have made at Michigan. And so it was really, and then he wound up getting a raise at Kentucky. So that was a run that he actually took himself out of the running for. He actually stepped out of that search. When the second search came, the one that resulted in linguist, he was in that, but obviously they focused on Mo. There were some different connections there that wound up landing on a really, really good coach. And so, Klink was back at Kentucky, and now here you have the sun, the moon, and stars aligning for both of those guys to get better opportunities for themselves.
Note that one with Clinkscale, he got a 3-year deal. He got 3 years guaranteed by Michigan, and my guess is probably in the $2 million total plus range. We don't know.
When you factor in the buyout, I think.
Yeah, so. Yeah. So he negotiated a good deal for himself. He's got his neck, and in the coaching world, having 3 years guaranteed, especially for an assistant coach, is a big deal. So Michigan did, go out and really aggressively pursue him, obviously.
Yeah. And so here's one that I want to throw at you guys, because I heard Monday that he got offered the job, right? I know Klink has wanted to be at Michigan for a long time, but it didn't take place. I mean, Kentucky was making a run. They were offering a third year, more money, but they couldn't offer him a higher title. It's like they're titled out at Kentucky. Right. There's no room for upward movement for him at Kentucky. The sticking point that I'd heard from Michigan was the title, because he was pass game coordinator at Kentucky, was looking to be a co-DC, which Mo Linguist was. And so I was wondering how, are they just going to say co-DC? So what wound up happening is co-DC is an incentive in this contract with Michigan, where he can become a co-DC after year one based on certain benchmarks. And I was trying to figure out what the thinking must be. I don't have any intel on this, but my speculation is that's that's a little more assurance. You're gonna have a guy around a little bit more, because there is power, there is appeal, there is marketability with that co-DC tag. So if you put it out there you dangle it out there as a carrot, maybe it assures you're keeping your hands on that guy a little bit longer than if he got the co-DC tag coming in the door. I wonder what you guys think of that thinking.
I mean, I guess I can see that. The continued bearer to Steve Clinkscale's employment is not going to likely be Steve Clinkscale. If I can venture that, but you can't like run your program like that's a true fact. So I get why they did it. Feels a little bit like deck chairs to me, but at least this move makes sense. I like moves that make sense. It feels like might be a little bit too late. Too late in the realm of moves that make sense, but they're doing it. Yeah. This is a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, from Michigan's point of view, it may be rearranging the deck chairs. I don't know. but from Clinkscale's point of view, it makes complete sense. I mean, it's a lot easier to get a head coaching job when you can say, "Hey, I've been a DC, I was a defensive core," and so for his future, this is sensible and legitimate. You'd understand why he would want that.
Mhm.
But from Michigan's point of view, at this point, anything they can do to stop rolling snake eyes is a good thing. And I think Clinkscale is a terrific hire.
I think that like this is like Ronald Bellamy, like Courtney Morgan, like this is one of those guys that Michigan, like Mike Hart, one of these guys that they're bringing in who can outlast a Harbaugh firing, right? Clinkscale's a guy who's, and I mean they got to think that way because you got to recruit that way, right? So I think that he is first of all, he's not like Linguist where he's bounced around every 2 years, right? This is a guy who spent I think 7 or 8 years at Ashland. Before moving up to Cincinnati. He spent 3 years at Cincinnati when he was, sought after. And then he's been at Kentucky since 2016, so almost as long as Harbaugh's been here. Clinkscale was loyal to Kentucky, when he was a big name in Michigan and Michigan State, made runs for him. So he's a guy who doesn't seem to be looking for the next job always, that he kind of wants to earn and he wants to stick around and develop the guys he recruits, more so than Linguist at least. And I think that he is the kind of guy, because of the Detroit connections, because of the, the stability that he brings, and because of the stability of his contract, that when he's out recruiting guys, he can say, look, even if they have to fire Harbaugh to feed him to the dogs, and they bring in Matt Campbell or whatever, I'm sticking around. I'm still going to be here, and I'm still going to be your coach. Obviously, can't no guarantees in that, but it does give the program a little bit more stability, and that's one of the things they needed.
That's a great point, and I hadn't thought of this at all, but good for you, Seth. I mean, think about what happened when Rich Rod came in. That was a debacle. He completely, and it was a debacle in part because he completely cleaned out his staff and brought all of his guys with him.
No, he kept Fred Jackson.
He kept Fred Jackson. He fired everyone and then rehired Fred Jackson. But basically he cleaned out his staff, and to me that was just not a good plan.
I don't know if I agree with that because
I know
all of
the
offensive assistants have done nothing except run zone stretch for 75 years. Yeah. And he's bringing in an entirely different style of offense that none of these guys have ever coached. He has.
I know, but the problem.
Maybe the defensive staff.
Yeah, maybe the defensive staff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, was the shine off the Braun English Rose at that point? It kind of felt like it.
I mean, versus who he brought in as defensive backs coach.
Yeah,
fair. Hey, he was a good defensive coordinator at West Virginia for a number of years.
He was not. That is a misinterpretation. They got Paterno's old guy and had him coaching there quietly because they couldn't give him a nice title because everyone say, "Oh my God, you're resuscitating Paterno." But no, that was not his defense.
But Brian, think about it. What if Rich Rod comes in and says, I'm going to. These guys are good football coaches. They've been recruiting guys that are good football players, and I want to try and keep at least some basic stability here, because don't fix things that aren't really broken at their core.
This is the year after the Appalachian State game. I'm just
but remember that
let's rehash 2007 to 2009, everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in the current moment, it's worth some rehash, and so
why?
It's worse.
It's like we have all these bad things to think about, and Craig's like, "But what about these other bad things that we're not considering right now?"
We have a whole segment on the Anderson report that we have to get to, and you want to stop and wait and talk about Rich Rod's secondary? Like,
well,
wasn't there like a derailment in 1898, and we failed to address that?
All right. In any event, I like your idea. Let me stop there. One is I would just say if Rich Rod had said, "Hey, I'm keeping Ryan Mallett. I'm not running him out of the program.
I don't think
Well,
Ryan
I don't
Mallett
think
was
he had
staying
the
either way.
opportunity.
Yes, he
I don't
would
think
have.
he had the opportunity to keep Ryan Mallett. I think if he had
Yes,
kept,
he would.
if he had kept the defensive guys,
Yeah.
if he had kept English and Vance Bedford, and I'm trying to remember who all was there at the time, but you wound up with like Scott
Herman,
Schaefer.
Jim Herman.
No, Herman was gone.
No, Herman was
Herman
gone
was
by that point.
Gone. Okay.
Was
Yeah.
Hoke there? I don't remember.
No, Brady was gone too. Forgive me. I
Yeah.
didn't know we were going to be talking about this, or it would come, it would
Who
come
would've
right to
thought?
mind. But he wound up with like Scott Schaefer, and I mean, it was just a hodgepodge.
Yeah.
Well, I talked to Scott Schaefer back then. I liked Scott Schaefer, and he was completely at sea. He was completely cut out by Rich Rod and the rest of that staff. And I talked to him a lot, and he felt like, what am I doing here?
Exactly.
And
That's kind of my point.
and so, yeah, it is your point.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, but Seth's point is a good one. You know, bring a bunch of young guys in, coaches that you think are good, talented coaches who are young and enthusiastic and have energy to recruit and have some proof that they can recruit. I mean, in doing that, hasn't Ward Manuel, if to the extent he's involved, done a really smart thing? Because now all of a sudden you bring in, if Harbaugh goes, and I'm not suggesting that'll happen, but if Harbaugh goes, don't you want to bring in a head coach that fits in with those guys, as opposed to the opposite of what happens? Let's just get rid of all these guys. Who cares how good they are, enthusiastic, smart they are, anything else? Just get rid of them.
I mean, I think
that's sort of idiotic, loss of history.
How many coaching
Happens in institutions all the time, and it's almost always a mistake.
How many coaching transitions have we seen where large chunks of the previous staff actually stays on? It's very rare. I mean, unless it's like a Ryan Day situation where you're like, just
Ryan Day is a good example, right?
But he's already on the staff. Like, you're not bringing him from outside.
Yeah,
he doesn't have
I know,
all other guys.
But again, you had a system that was working in transition and didn't have a lot of turnover.
Yeah, that does make it unique. Is that a lot of transitions you see, you're taking over for a program that was like, oh man, they're terrible. Everyone got fired. This was like our retiring. You know, the program wasn't in the toilet. They certainly had a disappointing start.
The program wasn't in the toilet, but it was set to go in the toilet.
I don't agree with that.
No, Rich Rod inherited all of 7 offensive linemen, right? 7.
Yeah, I know.
All of his skill position players were freshmen because there were no veteran skill position players. The quarterback situation after Mallett transferred was a true freshman, Stephen Threet.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a redshirt freshman because he had a redshirt year.
Freshman, and
so it didn't matter what he did. He could have tried to do he could have had the exact same playbook that Michigan had the year before, and they would have been one of the worst offenses in the country.
Well, wait,
they simply did not have the personnel.
I don't agree with this take completely. Although, I mean, one is Alex Mitchell would have stayed.
Alex Mitchell.
He was okay.
Alex Mitchell came out of retirement because Michigan needed to play him in the Ohio State game, and that's where that infamous screenshot comes from, where literally no one on the Michigan offensive line is blocking anybody.
I know, but
Alex Mitchell is a great symbol of why the program was about to go off a cliff.
And
you can't. No.
All right.
We'll
talk about it.
Sounds like this is another show. It doesn't have to be this show.
No more shows about this.
It doesn't have to be this week. We can get that another week.
No more 2008, 2009 shows. No. We can talk about literally anything else.
I think
the team's 2007, Craig. You and I are doing this.
What color is your baby's poop, Seth?
I'm kidding. That is an absolute joke.
Look, I think there's a case to be made for retention of more than what he retained. But I mean, I don't think that you're wrong in saying that there were some serious issues that they would have faced even if Lloyd had come back. There's no question about that. But this was not a program. Again, maybe they were going to go off a cliff. Maybe they were on the precipice, but they weren't there yet. And so like that makes this different than most transitions where a guy's coming in for someone who just got fired. So, maintaining some of that culture wouldn't have been a totally bad thing.
It was Andy Moeller and Steve Szabo, by the way.
Yeah, you wouldn't, and you aren't
Yeah.
keeping those guys.
No.
No. But anyway, all right. we need to pause. We need to pause and come back on the other side and talk about the report that Michigan commissioned and paid for that basically indicted the university. You can't just say the athletic department indicted the university for its basic indifference over a span of decades for a doctor who abused scores of student athletes and members of the general student population. We will get to that on the other side here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA. The Ticket.
And we were clear, and thank you, Craig, for trip down memory lane. We all appreciate it.
Sorry.
Okay.
Brian's response is
It was
probably
funny,
appropriate.
so that's enough.
Uh,
But if
It
you do it
doesn't hurt
again, I will
anymore.
horsewhip you.
It doesn't hurt anymore. I think that's the
Yeah.
first time I rehashed that era, and like I was not in pain because of it.
I think if Rich had a defense, that he would have, he would have been more successful. He would have had to learn the political side of things. It's funny because I just talked to, they were looking at, Rich was looking at, what's the offensive lineman that came and left before he played it down? Willie Allen. Yeah, Rich is looking at that guy.
Yeah.
So they called like a couple weeks ago.
so was that just a tryout, essentially? They bring the dude in. I mean, did they look at his tape?
He came in to play, and he wasn't going to play. The sixth lineman position, really, it comes down to, do you want Zach Zinner at center? And if Zach Zinner at center is part of your best five, then the battle is between Carson Barnhart and Trente Jones, who had himself a really good spring. He couldn't play in the spring game because he was working through something, but that dude really had himself a good spring. And if you're Willie Allen, you're behind Trente Jones on the depth chart. And who even knows that Trente Jones is going to start? Trente Jones might be the sixth lineman if Verstartis is the center. So
I mean,
Allen, he's like, man, I'm going somewhere to play.
Yeah, Allen transferring here never really made any sense in the first place. Like, he wasn't performing at the level you'd need to at that level to expect to walk in and start.
Well, it gives me two thoughts. One is they either A, never looked at his tape, or B, thought this was just a spring transfer, a spring tryout, or C, they can't evaluate talent for crap. I don't know.
No, I think.
Well, I mean, the
we're on air,
opportunity
can't say
cost
anything.
here was so low, right? You bring in a guy, see if he works out. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
gonna have a
that
full
could be.
in the fall anyway. So
That could be.
especially with all the COVID stuff, right? So you've got all these waivers and stuff. It's a low cost swing. I don't think they're
Back
really
on 30. Back on radio in about 30 seconds.
That's the most
I think it was a
rational
beggars
take.
can't be choosers type of thing. Be
Yeah.
honest with you. I mean, I don't mean that in a disparaging sort of way against Willie Allen. It's like, man, we need
bodies.
Should have moved him to defensive tackle. I know he's 6'7", and that wouldn't work, but still might have been.
Now, I just like that Trente really stepped up because, frankly, I think just based on what I heard, I think Zach Zinner at center is key to them having their best five on the field. My personal opinion.
All right, guys, we're coming back on radio here. Stand by. Back on radio in 5, 4, 3.
And we are back with the Michigan Insider, Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, online at WTKA.com. Sam Webb, Ira Weintraub on the other side of the county, and some disappointing yet expected news. I mean, I think that everyone that was paying attention expected for this report to say exactly what it said, that for a span of decades, there was a relative indifference that really went across campus lines and went from, the Hill to the, down on South State and back. That Robert Anderson was allowed to operate in relative with relative impunity, so to speak. And that's what this report says anyway. And it seems to me the report is a concession. And so now the question is, what comes next? What do you do now if you're Michigan? So let's start off first with your reactions to the report. And then after that, what are the next steps for Michigan? Whoever wants to jump in.
As soon as many people started coming forward, you knew what this report was going to say. And it was going to say that in the time that this was happening, the sort of trauma that was being inflicted was not taken seriously by a lot of people. We privileged the jobs of married white men over the health of the people they were taking care of. And this is probably a society-wide thing, and the university was not any different from a lot of large organizations at the time, as we're finding out. It doesn't mean that there's not a lot of culpability to go around. There's not a lot of wrong doing that's happened, and that people should reap the consequences, except almost all of them are dead. So this is not a situation where you can go and do a whole lot. And the moves you make are going to be financial to the victims and symbolic. So I think the university has already started gathering names of people who were affected by this person. There's going to be a fund for them. And, there are plaintiffs' lawyers who are making a stink about all this stuff, but I think they're just talking their book. And what the university has done now as an organization in 2021 is about right. I'm not going to say that they've been perfect, but this report they had authored is not the kind of, let's try to exonerate some people, let's try to downplay it. No, it says exactly what happened. It's not trying to spare anyone's feelings. So I think the modern university did what it needed to do. And the old university, the university of the 70s, 60s, 70s, the 80s, cannot be held accountable because they're all dead. And then the one person that we need to talk about is Bo Schembechler, because unsurprisingly, he got wind of this and he didn't take actions to stop it. So what do we do about that? I feel like the symbolic things to do are rename Schembechler Hall and take down the statue.
What about Panem Natatorium?
Panem Natatorium, I think Brymac on Twitter said it should be Denard Robinson Natatorium, and they should have done that years ago. And
I'm okay with that.
So let me draw a contrast here for a second and see if it's a contrast that can be made. So in the case of Joe Paterno at Penn State, what Jerry Sandusky did was there was no ambiguity at all. There was no confusion about whether it was abuse or not. That this was rape that was being reported to him, that he decided to sweep under the rug. Rape. In the case of Bo Schembechler, is it possible? Not that it makes it excusable, but does it sanitize him compared to Joe Paterno to say he thought this was treatment? He thought that this was just, hey, you need to be tougher, and that this wasn't abuse. Does that in any way distinguish him and his lack of oversight here in ways that you can't sanitize Joe Paterno? What do you think?
I don't think the comparison helps anybody. I think that if you're what's the point? Right? Like there's ways to approach this where you're like, what's going to make me feel better? And one of the things that makes me feel better is to say this person is evil or this person was less evil than this person.
No, that's not what I'm getting. What I'm getting at is you're making an assessment, because we're talking about taking down statues and renaming buildings. What's the criteria for that? Does intent have anything to do with it? And if he thought this was treatment, does that matter?
I think
clearly wasn't the only one. Does that matter? Maybe it doesn't matter. In the case of Joe Paterno, this was a crime. He knew he was covering up a crime. In both
I don't care. I don't care, because the comparing crimes is you're already in the weeds. This is about the victims. This is about problems in society then that and problems that continue now, and and that's what we need to care about. If someone's coming to you and they're trying to make a thing out of this because, like, Penn State was worse, or Penn State fans like, oh, now you're just like us, or Michigan State fans like, you're just like us, don't talk about that. Say, look, Bo knew it was in a position to do something, and he didn't do something. I personally don't care what they do about the name of the building. I don't like building statues anyway. I always said this: don't build statues, build busts, because it's a human, not a god. And that's what happens when you treat people as gods, is that you start to, they're going to disappoint you. I think it's about what happened to the victims, and I think that's where our focus should be. And, symbolic, like Brian says, doing things symbolically, if that helps the victims, then that's where we're talking. I don't really care about the comparisons between other schools, because we did have something wrong here, and we're dealing with it, and that's what we should be focused on.
So
Go ahead, Brian. But
So my point of view is, like, I think you could maybe understand why someone from Bo Schembechler's background in the 60s, 70s, and 80s would have the kind of cavalier attitude he had towards what we now recognize as abuse. That is not particularly surprising. If you had told me that this had happened and Bo Schembechler had, like, really gone on the warpath, that would actually surprise me, just because I have grandfathers. I know what people from that era are like. They're not all like Craig,
they're all a lot. Those people are all younger than I am.
But I mean, so what? But everybody's dead, right? So what are we doing now? What message are we sending now about whether this is acceptable? Whether, even though we might understand the reasons that this may have happened, that aren't necessarily Bo Schembechler's fault, but the society around Bo Schembechler and how he was raised. What are we saying now about what the appropriate actions are to take in these situations? And since I think our answers are not what Bo Schembechler did, very emphatically, that we need to start reconsidering his legacy.
Yeah, I mean, that's very right on and elegantly stated, Brian. From my point of view, from a practical matter, what I would want to know if I was the university is, this guy, apparently Anderson, was fired from the University Medical Health System.
University Health,
UHS. He's fired. And the next thing they know, and I don't know why, he's a part of the athletic department. And I talked to, I'll say this, a former athletic director, and he said, I have no idea how he got here. We don't choose him. We don't go and ask. They're assigned to us by the hospital, by the University of Michigan Health System assigns us doctors. We don't say, we want this guy, we want that guy. And so the thing that would be most distressing to me is, how the heck did that happen? When somebody fired him for these exact behaviors and then reassigned him to the athletic department. In terms of Bo, I just don't know. Here's the problem. I had a case yesterday, and with two people sitting in the same room about something that happened a month ago. And they could not agree. They were both there. They both were a part of this incident. They couldn't agree for the life of them as to what the reality of that incident was. And over my years of doing lawyering, and so many years I've seen so many instances of events that people who were there at the same time, saw the same thing, experience it in completely different ways. And so it's, when you're talking about something that happened 40 years ago and one of the people is dead, good luck trying to gather anything that you might call truth out of that. I will say this, though. I agree with Brian that, and this is political, that to some extent it almost doesn't matter. We know that this guy was guilty almost he was guilty to 100% certainty of sexually abusing people. And we know the university completely fouled it up. We know that some people in the university completely fouled it up. And it seems likely that some people who knew or should have known that something was wrong didn't do anything or weren't aggressive enough in dealing with it. Now, whether Bo was one of those people or not, I don't think we'll ever know. We will never know what was exactly said to him or what happened in these meetings. Maybe John Bacon has a better sense of it because he knew Bo better than any of us. But I think you're right. I think that probably what makes sense is we have to reconsider his legacy almost regardless of the reality, almost regardless of the truth, and which we'll never know.
The transgression here is certainly, I can't think of anything on this level of egregiousness, but again, it's a transgression that responsibility is shared, and so it's why I ask the question. If we are talking about removing statues and removing names, and we remove intent from the equation, if we remove the times from the situation, and we're judging them based on today's measure, which I have no issue with, but why not apply that same scrutiny to Fielding Yost, for instance, and what he did with Willis Ward? Why not apply
isn't that Seth's point? Isn't that the point that both Seth and Brian are making? And that when you make, gods or icons out of people, they'll always disappoint you, especially in the context of time. When
you can go further. You can go across campus and see Taubman in this and Taubman in that.
Yeah.
You can. The CC Little building has been a bone of contention for
They changed it
a long time. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
They changed it, and the process that they changed is they created a commission. The regents created a commission that reported to the president, and they reported back their findings, and they changed the building. And I think there are more controversial names on buildings than Schembechler at University of Michigan that should be changed, but I don't think that matters. I don't think whether you change one building should matter on whether you change another building. I don't think you should have that conversation of comparing, because then you're getting away. Because then it's just saying, well, there's all sorts of problems in history, so we shouldn't hold anybody accountable.
No.
You should be doing what.
No, it's about assigning a standard to it.
It's so beyond what I can care about. I think that if the victims want the building name changed, that's who I would like to hear from. My opinion on this should not matter at all.
So one thing about Yost is that the Willis Ward incident you are citing is that he agreed to bench Willis Ward as the athletic director when Michigan played Georgia Tech. So, a large part of Penn State's legacy, like We Are Penn State, comes from the fact that they were playing a Southern team, and the Southern team said, "Don't play your black players," and they said, "We are Penn State, go to hell." And so that's a major part of their legacy that Michigan does not get to share. But in terms of can this person's name be on a building, I think that's an entirely different ballpark, because this is benching a guy for a game, which he should not have done, to be absolutely clear. But it's not enabling.
Well, I mean, that's not the only example of Yost devout.
Yeah, Yost was racist.
Yes,
and there are plenty of reasons you can go through and find if you wanted to talk about who Yost was and some of the decisions that he made and who he hurt by his decisions. You are going to find plenty of them. I've studied Yost and read books about Yost, and people who cover him have not minced words about that. You are going to find problems with lots of historical figures. You're also going to find that Yost did a lot more than you even realized to give Michigan its athletic department. That the reason why we have a huge stadium is Yost. So you're going to find that with Schembechler too. 30, 40, 50 years from now, you're going to look at Michigan's program and see that they are in places they would not have been had it not been for Bo Schembechler's coaching. I don't think that history is history. Okay, you can't change it by. All you can do is really look at the person and say, are we going to talk about this person as an historical figure who was part of his culture at the time, and don't excuse him for that. Make sure that that's known. So, like, you walk into Schembeckler Hall, you should have the Anderson report there and talk about what happened at the University of Michigan and who was hurt by it. I don't think that you don't hide history, and you can't cover up history, and you can't sanitize history. It's your history. I think that you should not hold people as gods. I don't think that you can look at the word Schembeckler, and we've done this at Michigan way too long, and say that that is just a paragon of virtue. And I don't think you can do. I think that the virtue needs to be virtue, and that, at some level he did reach our match up to our standards, and we are discovering now that at a very deep level and a very hurtful level, he did not meet our standards. And I think that that's now part of the story, and it has to be discussed when you talk about Schembeckler with the rest.
I guess for me, I'm not married to I'm not married to statues and commemorations. We canonize a lot in society. A lot of people in society that should be canonized, right? So I'm the last one. This is me asking a question that is absolutely going to come up if this topic goes beyond the four of us, which it certainly will as we go forward. And you're going to have some people who are saying, well, wait a minute, the whataboutism here, if this is your standard for removing a statue, if this is your standard for changing a name, then don't we need to apply it elsewhere? Now, I don't necessarily buy that either, but you got to be prepared to deal with that position, especially from those. You're going to have some former players who come out and are like, hell no, this was not my experience.
I talked to a lot of guys who play for Bo, and I have, for the most part, been pleasantly surprised at how they've taken this. I was way more concerned about having like a Joe Pa element that where they were very resistant to the university even looking at this thing. And for the most part, they've read the report, read the salient parts of the report, and say this does kind of make me think differently about him. Now, they had a very different relationship with Schembeckler than any of us have, right? We saw him as the coach, like we saw him at like a at like car wash things, right? Like that was my interaction with Bo. They knew him on a very personal level, and he was part of their lives long after they played. So they are taking that with that's an experience that we can't have. There are also people who could have been victims of Anderson, and some of them were, and a lot of their teammates were victims as well. So I don't think it's even fair to expect them to be protective of Schembeckler's legacy, because they're also protective of their teammates.
Well, I mean, I think that is an interesting way to go forward, the one that you mentioned about providing historical context. So in the cases where this has happened before, it's always like, let's memory hole all of this.
Right.
And like maybe you don't take down the statue, but maybe you put something on the statue that, I don't know what it is, but it provides the context.
Or there's something that acknowledges this significant point.
And I don't know if that's going to feel good to everybody, but I don't think there's a way out that feels good.
You don't just skirt over it like it never happened.
Right. You put it out there, and you're like, Bo Schembeckler did a lot of things, and some of the things he did were good and even noble, and some of the things he did didn't meet our standards. And this is the whole person.
Well, I think that's a really good idea, Brian. I hadn't thought of that, but it makes sense. Maybe we should do the same thing with Yost. I mean,
and you could put something in Yost Ice Arena that's like, Yost did a lot of things for this university, and also these are the ways in which
he fell down.
He was a different person, and he fell down on the job.
Yeah, incidentally, the John Behe is the person to talk to about this, because John Behe interviewed Willis Ward, and the tape exists. I've listened to it, and interviewed a lot of I think about a dozen early Black athletes at the University of Michigan, and about their attitudes of what it was like then and their interactions with Yost, among others. It's really, it's quite fascinating stuff. And Behe is obviously the expert on this particular topic.
Yeah, there's this saying that goes, if those who don't pay attention or acknowledge history are doomed to repeat it, right? There's a tendency to, whether it's canonizing or whitewashing history in a way that makes it more fairy tale. It makes it more of a fairy tale and doesn't give you a true account of how you got there. I think it's a great idea that you brought up, Seth. I think it's an awesome idea, one that I think is applicable outside of the realm of sports, if you ask me. So anyway.
I want to be clear. I am not specifically suggesting putting a plaque talking about the Anderson report on the statue.
No, that's not like somewhere. No, I hear you.
Yeah. I
am.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that's such a bad idea.
I think if the statue stays up, you have to acknowledge
if the statue stays up, fine. I would, again, my preference, and I can't say that this is what they should do. I'm just saying if it was up to me and I wasn't able to gather information and suggestions from the victims, who I think should be a part of that, what I would do is make a bust and then put the information on there and include information about what Schembechler did for the university, as well as what he did and did not do.
This is a pretty long plaque, though. This is getting beyond plaque length.
I am one of the few nerds who goes around and reads those plaques. I went around Paris and read all of the ones, and they're this long. Okay, that's how much you get.
When you walk into Schembechler Hall, you walk into a museum.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It is a museum, so it totally fits to have some acknowledgement of this on or in that museum. So I just don't think I think it's a great idea. If you acknowledge, if you concede the points that are made in this report, which it seems like Michigan is doing. I mean, the report, commissioning and paying for the report, to me itself is a concession. The way in which it was conducted, like Brian said, wasn't one looking for a way to sugarcoat or whitewash it. You could have a company or a firm do a report like that, right? We've seen that. And this isn't that. So it seems to be a concession already. And that being the case, what are your next steps? There's restitution. I don't begin to know, what that looks like, but restitution is a part of it. And then there's the acknowledgement, or there's the process of establishing a system of checks and balances. So there's monitoring and oversight for everyone. And then there's the acknowledgement. There's the historical reference that everyone that comes after will be able to see. And I think it's a great idea. I think it is a great idea, where we're talking about a museum anyway, to have that acknowledgement there.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I don't know if you came in here, planning to put that forth, Seth, but I think it's a good idea. And no, that I haven't seen a statement from the university. I know we got to get out of here. Someone said, has the university made a statement yet? Not formally, but I think the report itself is a statement, personally. But has there been a formal response to the report? Not that I've seen. Have you guys seen it?
The university hired these guys, right?
Right.
So that's, to some extent, their report. Now, maybe they'll have further commentary. I expect they will, but it's their report. So they're not going to say, yeah, we hired these guys, but they're boneheads. That ain't happening. So, yeah, the report, the response by the university will be, well, here's what we're going to have to do or start thinking about doing.
All right, we got to get out of here, guys. But just so you know, there's been a request. Check this out. Excellent, rational discussion of a topic. Unfortunately, a rarity these days. Long live the roundtable. Just so you guys know. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
All right. Well, there'll probably be news next week.
It's living long, let me tell you. Longer than we thought it would go.
And I didn't even get to complain about how we got ripped off in field hockey.
Next week, Greg. Yeah, promise to give you the floor, my friend. I promise.
I'm pissed off about that.
And you got to talk about tennis. You got
Tennis?
to talk about tennis too, man.
I got tennis. We got all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, we got a lot of stuff.
Rudolph Virchow, which I expect
right.
Seth to start studying.
I've studied. Actually, no, I've listened to the Mike Duncan podcast, so
Okay.
I'm ready to talk.
Okay.
All right. Folks, we got to go. We got to scoot. Another great roundtable. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate the rest of you as well. msoftballacademy.org. Sign up, donate, whatever you can do. Be sure to participate in making strides against breast cancer. We got to get out of here. Back tomorrow. The Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTK, The Ticket, the official voice of University of Michigan Sports Ann Arbor, a community.